Hello, friends. Well, I know there's no one on this channel right now. I'm welcoming myself. But I'm sure many people will watch this video. Anyway, I'm Mark, and on this channel I'll be sharing stories about crimes, mysteries, and strange events. Of course, I'll also cover your scary or mysterious experiences. I'll kick off the first video on the channel with the story of the world's most famous serial killer.
It's time for the news.
The star of today's video is Bundy. Many of you might have heard about him. Theodore Robert Bundy, his full name, known as Ted Bundy, was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. He grew up believing that his grandparents were his real parents, only to discover later that his older sister was actually his mother. He found this out by coming across a copy of his birth certificate, which listed his real mother as his older sister, while the father's name was left blank. This means he was born out of wedlock. In one of his interviews, Bundy expressed a lifelong resentment towards his mother for never telling him about his real father and for letting him discover the truth about his parentage on his own. I believe this is one of the reasons that created a real monster. Sorry, Ted, I made a big mistake about you. Let me correct what I said. Ted was a monster from birth. He was born a monster. His mother was named Louise, and Louise had a younger sister named Julia Cowell. His Aunt Julia once mentioned that she woke up from a nap to find herself surrounded by kitchen knives, with 3-year-old Ted standing by the bed and smiling. In 1950, Louise changed her last name from Cowell to Nelson. At the request of many family members, she left Philadelphia with Ted to live with her cousins in Tacoma, Washington. In 1951, Louise met Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a hospital cook. Johnny and Louise got married that same year, and Johnny officially adopted Ted, which is how he became Ted Bundy. Johnny and Louise had 4 children together. According to reports, Johnny always tried to include Ted in family activities, but Ted preferred to isolate himself from them. Ted had a troubled childhood in Tacoma, Washington, where he struggled with identity issues and abuse. Even as a young child, he showed signs of anger and cruelty. He displayed the characteristics of a true criminal when he abused animals. His neighbor claimed that he once hung a stray cat on a clothesline in the backyard, poured lighter fluid on it, and set it on fire. It shouldn't be surprising to hear what I'm about to say. What kind of books and magazines do you think Ted liked to read? Yes, that's right. He loved reading detective magazines and crime novels. And another interesting fact, different from the books and magazines, is that he enjoyed watching women at night. Despite his claim of being introverted and not knowing how to make friends, his classmates said he was well-liked and popular in high school. His only sports passion was skiing, and guess what? He practiced this sport using stolen equipment. He was arrested twice as a teenager on suspicion of burglary and car theft, but his record was expunged when he turned 18. After graduating from high school in 1965, Ted Bundy attended the University of Puget Sound for a year before transferring to the University of Washington to study Chinese. In 1967, he began a romantic relationship with Diane Edwards, whom he later described as the only woman he ever truly loved. Bundy dropped out of college in 1968 and worked in low-paying jobs while also volunteering for Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign. In 1968, Bundy attended the Republican National Convention. After that, Edwards ended their relationship, prompting him to travel to Colorado and the Far East, visit relatives, and enroll in a single semester at Temple University. It is believed that Bundy discovered his true parentage during this period. Bundy returned to Washington in the fall of 1969 and began a relationship with Elizabeth Klopfer, which continued even after his initial imprisonment in Utah in 1975. We will come back to this detail later. In mid-1970, Bundy re-enrolled at the University of Washington to study psychology and became an honor student. In
Psychology. He was studying to become a professional criminal. Look, my children, I always warn you to be cautious around strangers, even those who seem well-educated.
In 1971, he got a job at the Seattle Crisis Clinic, where he worked alongside Ann Rule, who later wrote his biography. After graduating in 1972, Bundy joined Governor Daniel Evanser election campaign. He was later appointed as an assistant to the chairman of the Washington State Republican Party. Despite his mediocre LSAT scores, He was accepted into law schools based on strong recommendations. In 1973, Bundy rekindled his relationship with Edwards while also dating Klopfer. In January 1974, Bundy suddenly cut off all contact with Edwards, later explaining that he only wanted to prove he could marry her.
What is this, my friend Ted? You've amazed me. He couldn't bear being left behind, so he came back and took revenge on her. Thank God he didn't put you on his list.
By this time, Bundy began skipping his law school classes, which coincided with the beginning of young women's disappearances in the Pacific Northwest. No one knows exactly when and where Ted Bundy began his crimes, as he provided conflicting accounts and refused to disclose details about his early crimes. He told Nelson that he attempted his first abduction in 1969 and didn't kill until 1971 in Seattle.
Clegg Nelson, one of Ted Bundy's attorneys, was known for his legal acumen and sense of humor. He used his witty remarks to alleviate tension in the courtroom and was famous for his colorful socks and coffee addiction. You are welcome, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Well, psychologist Art Norman reported that Bundy claimed to have killed 2 women in Atlantic City in 1969. He hinted to crime investigator Robert Keppel about murders in Seattle in 1972 and 1973, but did not provide many details. Some, like Ann Rule and Keppel, believe that Bundy may have started his crimes when he was a teenager. His first documented crimes were in 1974 when he was 27 years old. By that time, he had mastered the skills needed to leave few forensic traces behind. Bundy owned a 1968 Volkswagen Beetle and lured his victims by pretending to be injured, asking for their help to carry his belongings to the car. None of them knew they were heading toward their demise. Bundy confessed to 30 crimes, but it is believed that he committed around 100 crimes that remain unknown and suspicious to this day. During the first half of 1974, female students disappeared at a rate of about 1 per month. Shortly after midnight on January 4, 1974, around the time he ended his relationship with Edwards, Bundy entered the basement apartment of Karen Sparks, an 18-year-old dancer and student at the University of Washington in Seattle. Her alias was Joni Lenz. Ted struck Karen with a metal rod from her bed frame and assaulted her with the same rod in the manner you can understand. Karen remained unconscious in the hospital for 10 days, and although she survived, she suffered permanent brain damage with significant loss of vision and hearing, as well as extensive internal injuries and a ruptured bladder. He didn't stop for long. About a month later, on February 1st, Bundy broke into the basement room of Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old student at the University of Washington. Bundy explained that he led Healy to a secluded area where he assaulted her, and since then, no one has heard anything about her. In the early hours of June 11th, 18-year-old student Jorgen Hawkins disappeared while walking through a well-lit alley between her boyfriend's dorm and her sorority house. Bundy later stated that he lured Hawkins to his car and knocked her unconscious with a crowbar. After restraining her, he drove her to a suburb 20 miles east of Seattle, where he strangled her and spent the entire night with her body. He didn't stop there. He claimed that he revisited Hawkins' body on 3 occasions. After the announcement of Hawkins' disappearance, witnesses came forward to report seeing a man on crutches, with a cast on his leg, struggling to carry a briefcase in an alley behind a nearby dormitory on the night she vanished. One woman recalled that the man asked her to help carry the briefcase to his car, a Volkswagen Beetle. The ironic twist here is that at the time, Bundy was working in Olympia as the assistant director of the Advisory Council on Crime Prevention in Seattle, contributing to the search for missing persons. Most of Bundy's crimes so far had occurred at night, but on July 14th, Bundy kidnapped 2 women in broad daylight from a crowded beach at Lake Sammamish State Park in Issaquah. During the investigations, 4 female witnesses described an attractive young man wearing white tennis attire with his left arm in a sling, who introduced himself as Ted and asked for their help in unloading a sailboat from his car. 3 of them refused, but one accompanied him to the car, and when she saw there was no sailboat, she immediately fled. 3 additional witnesses saw him approaching Janice Ann Ott, a 23-year-old probation caseworker at the King County Juvenile Court, as she left the beach with him to help. About 4 hours later, Denise Marie Naslund, a 19-year-old woman studying to become a computer programmer, left to go to the bathroom and never returned. Bundy later told FBI agent William Hagmeyer that Janice was still alive when he kidnapped Denise and that he forced one to watch as he assaulted and killed the other. After this incident, and based on the description provided by witnesses, the King County Police finally had a detailed description of the suspect and his car. Flyers were distributed throughout the Seattle area. A composite sketch was printed in regional newspapers and it was broadcast on local TV stations. Klupfer, the woman Bundy was dating, recognized the detailed sketch of the suspect and reported Bundy as a potential suspect. However, the investigators, who were receiving nearly 200 tips a day, thought it unlikely that a clean-cut law student with no adult criminal record could be the perpetrator, so they did not take Klopfer's tip seriously. All the crimes we've mentioned, and many more that we haven't, involving other women, took place in Washington, Oregon, specifically in Seattle. In August 1974, Bundy moved to Salt Lake City because he received a second acceptance from the law school at the University of Utah, and of course, the crimes and kidnappings moved from Seattle to Utah. In November, Klopfer contacted the King County Police for the second time and expressed her suspicions. When asked why she was suspicious, she told the police that the sketch resembled Bundy a lot, and also pointed out that the crimes in Seattle had occurred when Bundy was there. After he moved to Salt Lake City, the crimes stopped in Seattle and started happening in Salt Lake City, which increased her suspicions. In December, Klopfer called the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office and reiterated her suspicions, which further increased suspicion around Bundy. Bundy's name was added to the list of suspects, but at that time, there was no reliable forensic evidence linking him to the Utah crimes. In 1975, Bundy shifted much of his criminal activity eastward, from his base in Utah to Colorado. On January 12th, a 23-year-old registered nurse named Karen Eileen Campbell disappeared. Her body was found a month later next to a dirt road just outside the resort. According to the coroner's report, she had been struck on the head with a blunt object.
In the next episode, we'll dive even deeper into Bundy's descent into madness. We'll uncover the events that led to his eventual capture, the shocking confessions, and the courtroom drama that turned him into a media sensation. But beware, the deeper we go, the darker it gets. Until then, sleep tight if you can.